Bill, thank you for your response to my late email and sending that stuff around.
You're welcome. Haven't received a response yet, but I'll bug her if I don't hear anything.
It's I guess one thing is that as everybody goes to the polls, and even if there's a note to, a lot of the election workers that work in polls have lots of time to read whatever you send them.
Mm-hmm.
If she would send a thing that says, hey, by the way, we're using these signatures for something, and the state isn't, but the signature you put down may be used to confirm your vote in a municipal election. If you feel like telling workers that, or you're going to put up a sign, it just makes sense here in Anchorage and in Anchorage precincts.
Yeah. Like I said.
Even something that says last year we rejected X hundred votes for non-matching signatures.
Yeah. We'll see what she has to say and go from there.
All right. Well,
So.
if you need one of or two of her farmers to call the current, we do have her number.
All right. Perfect. I think we should get started just because we have a time constraint today.
So do I. And I'm pleased that you do.
Yes.
I call this meeting to order regarding work session regarding the Title 28 changes. It is 10:34 a.m. on September 25th, 2024.
We'll ask for introductions
Oh.
for the records. So we know who's on.
Called,
We just ask them to state their names on the record.
okay, if everybody could state their names for the record.
Madam Chair, my name is Bede Treadwell.
I'm Lauren Lehman.
Lisa Torkelson.
Jamie Hines, municipal clerk.
William Northrop, Election Administrator.
Liz Edwards, Deputy Election Administrator.
Thank you.
Since William to present the changes.
Okay, go ahead, William, and present the changes to us.
All right, I will. First, I want to say Katie Nolan was going to be here today, but she is excused from today's meeting.
Yeah, she let me know and asked me to share with you. She was at the emergency room for a medical issue, and I think she said that if she gets back home in time, she's going to try to tap in either by phone or because we're not on Zoom, so she might be able to by audio. But anyway, that was the message to me. So please share this with you. Her desire to be with us, but unable.
Thanks.
Perfect. Okay, so I guess let's just start at the top. So the first change is to the recount section of municipal code for elections. And simply all that's happening here is increasing the deposit amount from $50 to $200. The reasons for that is I've looked at other jurisdictions within Alaska, and Anchorage has the lowest amount for a deposit, whereas other jurisdictions such as Fairbanks, both the city and borough, North Star Borough, have a 200. So that's why this change is being brought forth, as well as lessening a burden on taxpayer dollars if a recount that is not automatic comes forth. And per code, that deposit is refundable if it is a valid recount or if the recount is won. Section 2 is along the same lines. So Section 2 changes the contest procedure, which prior to this change, there was no deposit for an election contest. Whereas again, in multiple jurisdictions within Alaska, there are different deposits, and these deposits differ from what is involved in a recount. It also brings in, if it's determined to be a non-valid claim, then the contestants who brought that claim forward must pay for the expenses. And it also provides a reimbursement clause for a valid complaint, where if the complaint is valid and it's looked into and the contestants succeed, they get their deposit back, essentially. And then there's a connection to the recount clause, or the recount section of code, where if the contest is valid and it's determined to result in a recount, then the recount code applies. And again, this change was brought because other jurisdictions have deposits and we do not, and lessening the taxpayer burden again if an election contest comes forth. And then section, I don't want to talk about these. So I'm gonna group section 3 and section 4 together a little bit here. And I'll talk about section 5 here as well for this part. Essentially, I'm introducing additional election crimes that are coming from the state statutes into code. And this was based off a recommendation by the Ombudsman in his final report from a 2023 investigation that he conducted. The current Title 28 does have certain election crimes that both APD can investigate and the prosecutors for the municipality can prosecute, but there are some that were not introduced back when these were introduced several years ago. So basically what section 3 and 4 are doing are adding additional state election crimes into code so that the Muni can prosecute those, investigate and prosecute. And then what section 5 is doing is section 5 is bringing an entirely new section of code that is for unlawful interference with elections that is all within state statutes. So simply copying state statute and bringing them into municipal code. So again, it allows APD to investigate if there is something that needs to be investigated, and it allows for the municipality to prosecute so that we're not always relying on the state. And that's essentially all that I'm doing with these changes.
I want to go back to section 2, paragraph F. It says, if the contest results in a recount, the contestant or contestant shall pay all costs. I'm trying to figure out what's happening here. If somebody contests, and based on that, there is a recount, and the recount demonstrates that their contest was appropriate, why would they have to pay that at that time?
So that language itself, my notes here, I didn't write what jurisdiction that was from. That was from another jurisdiction within the state. I'm blanking on which jurisdiction it was, but essentially what it does is it also goes back to the code that involves recounts. And if I'm remembering correctly, within that code, there is a section within the recount that gives, if the contestants or the people asking for a recount are, say, victorious, they get the money back. And I'll double check that. I don't have my computer in front of me, but I can double check that. But I'm pretty sure that's why I'm referring it back to the recount clause.
Okay. Probably need to go back and look at what 060 says, and that may establish what the rules are for who pays.
Quickly bringing it up on my phone now.
Okay.
Okay, so 289060 return of deposit says A, the full deposit shall be returned after a recount if 1, a different candidate or result on the proposition or measure is certified, or 2, the vote on recount is 4% or more greater than the vote originally certified for the candidate or result on the proposition or measure supported by the recount applicant. D, if this section does not require that the entire deposit be refunded, the municipal clerk shall refund any money remaining after the costs of the recount has been paid from the deposit. The assembly may waive or refund all or part of the deposit in interest of maintaining voter confidence in the election process.
I would hope that we get a lot closer than 4%. I would expect that it's maybe more like a difference of up to 4 votes, but most of the time the recount shows that it's either right on or within a vote or 2.
Yeah, so there's a couple different recount. So there's the automatic recount, and then there's a recount that's requested. And this section, section 2, which starts off with the contest procedure, they're still bringing the contest, but if it's found valid and the result is there is a recount that's required in this area or for this area-wide election, that's when the non-automatic recount comes in. So the automatic recount is not being triggered by this code change.
I remember presiding, well, it was under my responsibility. The Division of Elections Director was actually presiding over it, but and I was present for the breaking of the tie, but there was a state election in the primary, and the results were, it was a tie. And each candidate challenged that, and in court, some of the votes were disqualified and some additional votes were brought in. But after that was done, it was still tied and needed to be broken. But it just shows you how close an election can be. And in that case, one vote from somebody would have made the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would just say that it is 0.5% that requires an automatic recount. If we are 0.5%, the clerk automatically calls a recount. For that
5% of all
0.5% of
all ballots cast.
yeah.
Yeah. But in this case, if the recount is within 4%, then it was like, hey, we did our job, and you didn't accept the count that we had, and it didn't make any difference in who won. Yeah. Okay.
Well, that leads to a drafting question, Madam Chair, on D. And first off, let me just state philosophically that a public interest recount can come for many reasons. Sometimes it's not even to change the result of the election, but to make the count more accurate. If there's an issue on computers, for example, or if I'm remembering the contest issue of election ballots not delivered to a particular precinct, which could happen for many reasons, your fault, or this office's fault, or the post office's fault, or whatever, and so raising the hurdle to question that, and we've already raised it once. We took it out of this commission and moved it toward the assembly, and now you want to raise the hurdle further. Philosophically, I find hurdles to be undemocratic. Okay, so that's where I start. But the second question is, but at the same time, I've certainly run lots of government things where you want to make a decision and there's an appellate procedure and you go through the appellate procedure, but when it's over and it's reviewed, it should be over. So the first thing that I've got is under 2D, where you say, unless the grounds for which the contest brought are determined to be valid. And obviously that's kind of a self-linking ice cream cone. Whatever your grounds are, if your grounds are valid, then you don't have to pay. But valid shouldn't mean it changes the result of the election. It may mean that it changes the result of the count. And so I'm just concerned about that raising the cost. The second thing, which is just downright awful, is let's suppose an election bureaucracy was feeling it was harassed, didn't want to do a recount, and said, fine, yeah, go ahead, put in your $1,000 to the recount, but we're going to have 19 armed guards here at $800 an hour for the 19 of them, and we're going to do this, and there's no limit on your costs for the recount. And so you can dissuade a recount on something that's open-ended on your deal. And I'm not saying that you guys would do this. I'm just saying that my wife is from Kentucky, and I've been watching a particular county for years where a judge used to hold hearings in a Volkswagen and evict people for violating the fire regulations. And this is where the judge was just shot by the sheriff for a different reason. But I mean, it's just kind of crazy when you make it harder for the public to question you, and yet you've got all the tools to tell the public to go to hell. And I'm not sure how balanced this is. That's all I'm saying. And the other question I've got is on unlawful interference with an election. I see that. There's a presumption that an election official may never have unlawful interference. And I don't know where that is covered in the criminal acts. And let's just take a couple of examples. In my history in Alaska elections, we had election officials who didn't do the most cursory of counts, ballots out versus ballots back and that sort of thing. And we found 270 ballots in a locker, a month after the election. We didn't do the cursory counts, and we found all the ballots destroyed in the town and basically in a barrel full of seal oil. And I guess what responsibility is there for an election official if there's any kind of malfeasance or corruption? So those are my two questions.
Okay, I will respond. Your second question, let me respond to that first because that's easy. So in code right now, it's 28-200-130 election official misconduct in the second degree. So that already exists. I compared. So when doing this initially, I looked at all of the state statutes involving election crimes and compared them to what we had on our code. And it seems to me that the election official misconduct at the state level and at our level matched. So there was nothing that needed to be done there. All of these, so what section 3 and 4 are doing are just bringing the additional ones in that were left out originally from code when we first brought in the criminal parts of the Alaska code into code, which I think was done, when was that, back in 2014, I think was when the conversation was starting. I'd have to go back and check the recording that I listened to, but there was a recording on that specific issue during a title change. To your first question, so what section 2 is, it's talking about contest procedures. And contest procedures are different from recount procedures. So the recount has its own procedure, and the contest has its own procedure. If essentially what the you didn't talk let's see. Yeah, you didn't talk about F in your question, but essentially what that's doing is it's just if the complaint is valid and the determination is that a recount needs to be done, then it goes to recount. So the complaint and recount are generally separate unless that's what the result of the complaint is. But essentially, we can't. So if, per your hypothetical, if we didn't want to run a recount, we can't just say no, because these contests would come in front of the assembly, who would then be the fact finders, essentially, as a judge would, kind of how that works. So they would look into it and determine whether or not this needs to be looked into. If it's looked into and it's found that the complaint is valid, then we would be directed to run that recount. So we can't just say no recount. And there would definitely be a certain amount of money that we have in order to do this. So we couldn't go out and hire armed guards at $800 an hour either. So,
Bill, I'm just trying to try to figure out. All right, just remember we didn't have a contested election, but just real, I came on this board to help build confidence in elections. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
We had a bunch of observers who papered the system with a lot of complaints. We answered most of the complaints, but then the assembly said, "Oh, this was awful." I didn't think there was anything awful about it. That's what the public should do, and that's how we answered it. But the assembly said, "Okay, we're going to move all that to us." And so now there's this kind of hierarchy of what's a contest, what's a recount, and what's an election challenge, which goes to the courts. All right, and in the contest case, and there were several kind of interesting issues. I'm not going to say, there was the interesting issue of did we disenfranchise people by accepting the state list ahead of, there was the list issue that came up. There was the interesting issue of at least an argument that ballots weren't delivered to one precinct. It's an interesting issue. I'll put it this way. We dealt with the interesting issues, I thought, fairly well at the commission level by asking your predecessor to let's look into this, let's see what that is, and so forth. And theoretically could have held off, quote unquote, certification until we got to the bottom of a couple of those issues. Or we might have even sent forward certification with a notice to the assembly that you may have a contest on something like this, because we also explained to some of these people, yeah, we're not going to, we can't reverse your election results or even hold up the election results, but thank you for letting us know. And my problem with that legislation was it basically said, don't even let us know. What I'm worried about with this thing now is it says anything that doesn't say our word is God costs you $1,000 to ask the question. All right? And I don't think we should cost the public $1,000 to ask a question. And so I really need to understand what a contest is in the current state of the legislation. The contest, just as an example, it's a long shot, and somebody who lost by many, many votes might still say, well, you didn't count these votes, and it wasn't really fair, and it wasn't really fair because you didn't have their signatures, because they're all old people, and their signatures were on microfiche, or something like that. An issue that I sent you an email about. Mm-hmm. And the person might be saying, we will contest this now in the public interest to make sure that you get that fixed next time.
Yep.
So I guess what I'm saying is I don't understand why we have to make it. We've already made it harder once in the last year. I don't understand why we have to make it even harder to question this. I've been in charge of government agencies where I get questioned all the time, and it comes with the job. So I don't charge people $1,000 to ask me if I did the water quality standards right. That's their right.
Okay, so per municipal code. It's section 28-100-010, grounds for an election contest. It states that a candidate or 10 qualified voters may contest the election for any person or the approval or rejection of any question or proposition upon one or more of the following grounds. 1. Malconduct, fraud, or corruption on part of the election official sufficient to change the results of the election. 2. The person qualified as an elected is not qualified as required by law. 3. Any corrupt practice defined by law sufficient to change the result of the election. So those are the 3 grounds for bringing a complaint itself. If it's something, contest, sorry. If it's something as simple as, I think that there's some ballots were not counted, I want to request a recount. That is different from a contest.
Yes, but can you request a recount before the assembly has certified it, so thus it is a contest?
Yeah, so again, all that the section 1 is doing is it's increasing the deposit, bringing it more in line with other jurisdictions within the state. And then 2 is bringing in a deposit, and then it's adding, if it's a non-valid complaint, so if it's just, I don't want to use this word because this is not court, but a frivolous complaint, then the person who bringing that has to pay the cost, so it's not on the taxpayers. It's not the burden of the taxpayers to pay. But if it is a valid cost, say we had an election official somehow change results, that would be covered by the municipality, and that deposit, that $1,000 deposit, would be returned back to that person bringing the contest. So it's like I said, it's bringing the municipality of Anchorage, which is the largest municipality in Alaska, in line with other jurisdictions within the state. Mat-Su-Borough and Wasilla both have a $1,000 contest deposit. And it's also lessening the burden on taxpayers. There is an option for people who do bring a valid complaint to get that deposit back.
I have a question. Have there been a lot of frivolous complaints that don't fall into the list of appropriate grounds? I mean, is there a problem that we are fixing, or we're just making sure that we charge as much as everybody else does?
So, to my knowledge, I could be wrong, because I've been here for a year, but if I'm wrong, I would appreciate Jamie or Liz stepping in. I don't know if there have been any frivolous complaints within those 3 grounds. There have been contests, sorry. There have been contests that have been brought. I don't know how much those cost the city. We've had one in 23, and we've had one come up this past election. So this is simply putting in place a structure where the city and the taxpayers are not on the hook for a contest unless it's valid, and it's bringing the municipality in line with other jurisdictions.
So Lauren told the story of the public interest in the recount from both sides that ended in a coin toss. In the Hickel-Hammond primary, which was a state one in 1978, the margin was 98 votes when the request for recount and then the contest happened. During that time, the lower court said that it's an undisputed fact that 10,000 ballots were counted that should not have been counted. It was an undisputed fact that lots of things didn't add up, and so forth. And the lower court ordered a new election. The Supreme Court did not deny the facts. They said, well, you proved it was a crooked election, but you didn't prove it was crooked in anybody's favor. And said the grounds aren't high enough to order a new election. And so the election stood. And it was not a vindication of the way the state had run the elections. It was not a vindication of one candidate or the other. It just happened to be that view of justice. And as a result, the legislature, in a very, which included legislators who had been on both sides of that primary, went and fixed a number of things in the election law. And I guess what I'm just saying is that sometimes when you're contested, it may not change the result of the election, but it's a useful process anyway. Sometimes it's a useful process to understand what you need to do to build trust. And, we have a situation now where you send a couple 100,000 ballots to the wind. You have no chain of custody on them while they're out there in the wild, so to speak. There's, we have lots of, validation procedures when they come back, but it just seems to me that just because all the other kids are charging $1,000 doesn't mean, this was my argument with parents. All the other kids, parents let them hang out at the mall. Well, we're not going to let you. All the other kids get to ride their bikes on Route 34. No, we're not going to let you. I thought they were awfully strict parents, but I tend to agree with them now. And I guess I'm saying I'm not, given the facts that we've made it harder to even question. Basically the assembly just told us we have no right or understanding to hear certain questions for, with a standard of this. Now you're going to raise this. I don't see why you need to do that. That's basically where I come from. I understand, yep, you can get by that and that makes fine, but it's not like it's going to cover your costs. $1,000 is the cost of today's meeting just to talk about this. And by making your part of government unquestionable by the public without a big cost, to me, is not very democratic. That's all I'm saying. And I'm not speaking for the left or the right. I'm just speaking for sometimes people will have a question. And there can be questions about whether ballots were delivered. There can be questions about the signatures. There's questions about how the computer works. We went through some of those. People can get upset and say, oh, well, this is slowing things down. Well, those are important questions to be aired. So I don't understand why, and if it's $1,000, is it $1,000 for each item that you bring up, each grounds that you bring up? Is it $1,000? I just don't see the need for it. That's all. I support what you're saying about the criminal stuff and so forth, Bill. And I didn't think we were going to talk about something like this today. I thought we were going to talk about what we asked for a meeting for, which was to work on trying to reduce the number of rejection ballots that we have and get you the legislative support for that. That's what I thought today's meeting was about. I'm sorry.
I would say that we don't think that we need legislative support for the curing process. We have a cure process in the code which is sufficient, and we can add additional ideas to what we do for curing without needing to change the code. So we can certainly have another conversation about that if the commission still wants to. As far as this goes, the Assembly looks at Title 28 annually, pretty much since they changed to vote at home in 2017 to adjust as needed. So I hear that you're not supportive of the contest procedure $1,000 deposit. Is that the same for increasing the deposit on the recount, or are you supportive of that change?
Well, all right. I think on all the changes, I've got one concern. You've got grounds for a contest, okay? And you read us 3 pretty stiff grounds for a contest, all right? And you want to raise the payment for $1,000 for a contest, and you also want to charge fees. And it doesn't. Okay, help me out. The only way you can get you get an automatic recount for the 0.5%, or you can pay for a recount. Is that correct? And is that before certification or after certification? I thought it was after certification.
Oh, before.
Is it before? So at the state level, you do the canvas, you announce the result, and
After certification. After certification. Okay, so the
that's
for
after.
the recount, it's within 7 days after certification of the election.
All right, and that's our certification or the assembly certification?
Assembly certifies,
Right,
We don't care for
you canvas.
right, our canvas, yeah. So after our canvas comes the assembly, and you've got it. And in the meantime, you've got a contest, which has to be not later on noon on the day of the first meeting, the assembly has issued a public notice, and we take up the question of whether to certify the election. So you've got this weird situation where you have to do a contest before you've even had a recount. And sometimes in the recount, you discover the reason to have a contest. So that's convoluted. You see what I'm saying? I mean, and I'll go back to the Hickel. I'll go back to the Hickel lawsuits. We did the recount, and as part of the recount, we did an audit of the election, and the number of people who signed the books versus the number of ballots that we found in certain precincts were so widely divergent that an election official late on a Saturday night goes, "Oh my God, I forgot those ballots I put in the locker," you know, and it was weird because after that, I think we told the state canvass board, at least add it up, see if the number of, people who walked in the door is the number of seats in the theater type thing, and so the recount actually taught us a whole lot about the possibility of a contest. And now you're saying you can't even do a contest, you can't even file for a contest unless you've done a recount, or you can't do a contest after you've done a recount because you have to file for the contest before. So that doesn't sound very fair. Okay?
Yep, I hear you.
Okay. And so I guess what I'm saying is, you can set the number whatever you want. I'm just telling you, whatever number it is, the higher you set it, the harder it's to do. And then you also have this catch-22 that says you can't do a recount unless you file for, you got to make it pretty clear for the arguments for a recount versus the arguments for a contest. And you can't do a contest until you can't even have a valid contest, in my experience, until you've done a recount for a lot of different reasons. Because a recount doesn't just add up the ballots they have. It also looks, did you properly, again, I mean, what we found in the Hickel recount was that, weird as it was, the state at that point had a witness signature requirement, and they let in thousands of ballots in precincts where it was going to help the governor win without a signature, and they denied a whole raft of ballots from precincts where the governor was not going to win on that, and we were never able to prove any sort of malfeasance there. We just, which is why the Supreme Court said you proved it was crooked, you didn't prove it was crooked in anybody's favor, which was very unfair in my opinion. But because there's subsequently been lots of court cases that say if you diminish voting in somebody's precinct and say it's a poor precinct, you're disenfranchising the poor, a race-based thing, and I don't believe that it's your view to be malfeasant anywhere, but But just understand, the courts have ruled on all that kind of stuff, and you don't discover a lot of that stuff until you've done a recount. So, so I guess all I'm saying is that, I mean, Bill, the $200 and the $1,000 doesn't. I mean, I'm not going to fall on my sword on that, but I just don't think you need it. The issue really is systematically between what happened in the last legislation and in this legislation, we are making it impossible to challenge an election result, and I don't believe that's appropriate. So,
I have a couple of things. Just so I understand, this is unless the grounds for which the contests are brought are determined to be valid. Let's take an example of what came up, I don't know, was it last year, but I think it was in Sand Lake or someplace there. They said, hey, we didn't get our ballots. That may have been true. Somebody may have gone through and stolen mail out of boxes. Okay, that does happen. It's very sad when it does. And yes, those voters could have got ballots. They could have come down here to the election central and voted, and I understand that. But sometimes the grounds may be valid, and we looked at it, and as I understand, at least my reaction was, that's possible, but could it really have changed the result of the election? And if the difference between the winning candidate and the second one was 200 votes, and there were 6 people identifying that they didn't get their ballots, and we said, yeah, it's too bad that it happened, but it wouldn't have changed the election, and we said proceed. I mean, that's kind of how we dealt with it. But then when I go, okay, those are valid grounds for contesting an election result, I think it is valid grounds, and but we say here, you know, that well, you're out your money and you've got to pay. And I think in a case like that, I would say let people raise valid issues. I don't like frivolous thoughts either. I don't want that. But my thinking is I would go with what's the lowest cost response we can have to a question somebody raises. Well, it might be us, the Election Commission, of course, supported by staff looking at it. But that would say, well, that's the lowest cost. And then if we do something and they challenge that, then maybe it goes to the Assembly. Well, that's next higher. Then it goes to Superior Court, and or something like that. But how can we, in our system, come up with a pretty low cost response to somebody's complaint and make that available to them? Does that make sense of what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And okay, so that's that part. The other is back to F. If the contest results in a recount, then the contestant shall pay all costs. What if we inserted after that, or be reimbursed for costs in a recount of an election as provided by AMC, whatever, 060. And I don't have that in front of me, but I would hope that 060 balances it and says, hey, if what you're saying is invalid or whatever, then you pay for it. But what if there's some validity to it? Then should they be reimbursed their costs? And would that be a way of keeping things a little bit more fair in our code?
Yeah, I think that's a valid addition, because it does, because that section, the 289060, does allow for, because I think I read it. Did I read that out to you guys? I think I did. But it does allow for the reimbursement. So I think having that brief sentence in addition to what's there, I think it's warranted.
it makes me feel better, and I think it would make somebody else reading this feel better about it, about this whole thing Mead's talking about balance.
I guess if I hit the button, it should go off,
Balance
sorry.
and, integrity in elections and balance, fairness. We want that. Yeah.
But what I'm hearing as a whole, and this isn't a meeting, so we can't vote on it, what I'm hearing is that there's no support here for sections 1 and 2 of this ordinance. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, Jamie, my advice is I don't know why we need it, but I hear, I do have another just general question about two. When did the sentence that says a person that signs and submits an election contest form containing false statements is guilty of unsworn falsification in the second degree? And, those of you who have had the pleasure of going to court know that two sides show up with a different view of the facts, and sometimes they're both right, as well as, sometimes one side's wrong and sometimes the other's wrong. But if I say, it was corrupt that election official A did this while election official A's husband, son, daughter, partner was running the campaign for B or doing something else, or, say it appears to be corrupt because nobody could put in a ballot after 7:45 rather than 8 o'clock or something like that, okay? That's not necessarily a false statement. It's a reason for a contest to have a factual look at the case, all right? And so again, I'm just wondering, if you look what we're doing, we're basically saying we're the government, we're right, and you're going to go to jail if you say anything wrong about us. You're going to pay on whatever we determine the costs are if you want to question us. It doesn't really look very democratic. So, and I agree with Lauren. I don't like facetious stuff either, and I've been through a lot of facetious stuff. So don't think that I'm trying to make your life worse. I'm just saying that I think we have to resolve recounts before contest. So I think the date of the contest makes no sense if you haven't had a chance to have a recount. And I also think that a contest that essentially that's where the assembly says, well, we may come back to you to find a finding of fact or something along those lines. I think a contest that says a false statement is guilty is kind of a, I don't know, maybe a lawyer would write that by saying, we're not saying this is true, we're saying that we believe it to be true, which is fair. I don't know, you're the lawyer, I'm not, but maybe you get around that. But I just worry about the stair steps here. So I would recommend that you at least have the recount first, okay, and make that real clear, and then set up the standards for the contest. And I think your standards are fine right now. Somehow, and I don't know how, I really wish we could figure out what you want the commission to do versus what Chris's legislation did last year, which is basically saying that nobody can bring a complaint before the commission because it might result in a contest, which we need to send back to you. So I'm trying to figure that part out.
So I can speak to that. It's my understanding that the assembly, if you were to hear grounds of a contest and then the assembly was to determine it valid, then does that jeopardize your ability in a quasi-judicial, since you've already heard about it, does that jeopardize your ability to do the investigation? So I think what the intent was that they're protecting the commission who makes recommendations to them to be able to do the investigation after if when the assembly says, yes, this is a valid contest, and we are going to ask the election commission to do the investigation quasi judicially. If you've already heard everybody's arguments about it, does that jeopardize your ability to do the investigation? Was, I believe, what the intent was.
What I just don't know from that, Jamie, is how many of that long night that we had where, Dustin Darden wanted us to look at his constitutional and biblical responsibilities, and we had the craziness with the jump drives, and I'm putting two evenings together. There were some things that we did. I mean, one of them was, I thought, a very valid question of the people who got votes in the mail versus, the old registration list versus new registration list, and they found 120 people that you had dropped off. I think fairly, but it was worth questioning, okay? It was worth questioning whether or not those people were improperly disenfranchised and so forth, and I think we all learned about it. And I don't even know if that can be raised in a commission level again, and it wasn't necessary, and we had to explain to them, well, we can't order a new election. The assembly can, the assembly really won't. You pretty much have to get a court to order a new election. But Chris was sitting here and we did that legislation that said, well, no, keep your guys clean with the finding of fact, whereas most of the stuff that we disposed of, we essentially were explaining to the public something they didn't understand very well. Okay, I mean, we served as this, I tried anyway to be a sympathetic listener. Oh, well, if you're really concerned about this, this is where we ought to deal with that, or whatever. And sometimes we said, we got a few days, and we asked staff to get some more information to folks. And I understand how they could come back to us with a finding of fact, and we also explained to people that we can only really certify a canvass or not, and we can sometimes go back and say, let's look at this, or we were inconsistent. I mean, somebody can certainly point out to us that we might be inconsistent on a signature thing or inconsistent on well, there were a couple of things where I think we stayed consistent, but it would have been easy to be inconsistent. So anyway, I just, if you're looking for guidance from us on this, my suggestion would be to look very carefully at the contest versus the recount situation. And maybe we propose that the timing for a contest is 7 days after certification and or a recount, that is legally and properly called and paid for. And then as far as the question of costs, I think you at least ought to submit yourself to a regulation that says you've got to provide the person an estimate of costs, or a limit of costs, so that nobody can accuse you of. I mean, as an example, let's suppose that while you're doing the recount, somebody found an issue in the computer, and you might say, "Oh my gosh, yeah, we've got to redo that." Now, is that part of the cost of the recount or part of fixing? All those things. So that would be my view, and just try to be as democratic as possible to let people question. That's all I'm saying.
Thanks. I hear that, and back to the bringing of complaints to the commission. You do have final audience participation on your meetings, and so that anybody is welcome at any time to do a public records request and come to you and speak to you at the end of your meeting and bring those topics up, and then you are welcome to make a motion to recommend the assembly do something about it.
Which is what I thought we were doing today.
So
yeah. Just remember, in the time that I've served on the commission, it's become harder to be an observer. You got to go to school to even observe. In my mind, the public ought to be able to observe every time, anytime. Obviously, you want people to stay within lines. We've made it harder to observe. We've made it harder to complain or raise a question. We've made it harder, and now you're making it harder to contest. And I don't think that's our job.
What I would say is that state law requires the campaigns to train the observers. And we recognize with Anchorage being nonpartisan that the campaigns didn't necessarily know how elections worked. The Democrat side and the Republican side have people that know how elections work, and so they were tasked with training their observers. We recognize that with us being nonpartisan, they can't go to the campaigns and ask for training, so that is why we took that on.
I understand, but you made it harder for Joe Q. citizen who feels that, his ballot might not have been caught, he didn't get something in the mail. It's one thing to come down here and make a complaint or observe. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Just one comment on Commissioner's previous, the person that signs and submits an election contest form containing false statements, can you add knowingly signs and submits to help assuage the fears that, well, I'm submitting something and they determine it to be false, then I'm guilty. Whereas, it kind of takes the burden off. It takes the fear out of there. It's like, oh gee, what if? So I better not say anything because I could be found guilty if it's found false. Or am I trying to scam the system? That's a whole different mentality.
Correct.
And should be
And so
dealt with accordingly to the law, but just a person that if it turns out that they're false statements, well, they weren't false when I turned them in. I truly believed, based on my information, I truly believed that they were true, but if they're found to be false, then I'm automatically guilty in that certain circumstance, as how I read it anyway. I'm not a lawyer, so.
I think William can correct me. I'm guessing he has it pulled up here, but it's my understanding that AS 1156-210 and AMC 830-170 state it that way.
So I have AS 1156-210 in front of me. Basically, that says, A person commits the crime of unsworn falsification in the second degree if, with the intent to mislead a public servant in the performance of a duty, the person submits a false written or recorded statement that the person does not believe to be true, 1, in an application for a benefit, or 2, on a form bearing notice authorized by law that false statement made in it are punishable. B, unsworn falsification in the second degree is a Class A misdemeanor. So that's what the state has. And then I need to pull up.
And that's it, something about knowingly.
Well, it implies knowingly.
Yeah.
I mean, that implies knowingly. I don't think it hurts to take the chair's suggestion of knowingly.
Kind of
Or if I could, or insert instead of is, to say maybe guilty, because that AS, I think it's 56 that you read, provides how that is determined, which makes sense to me. And so it's, instead of prejudging, we just say, look at these two, and it would be according to those two.
Okay. We will look into that. We will let the Assembly know that you did not agree with the additions of Sections 1 and Sections 2 to this ordinance. And we have another meeting in 30 minutes with the election, or the Quality
Municipal
Municipal Services Ethics and Elections Committee.
Of the Assembly?
Of the Assembly, which right now, and so to do this very same thing. So we will relate to them that you guys were not supportive of sections 1 and 2 and recommended verbiage change in the unsworn falsification sentence.
And if you could raise the issue of a contest before a recount. I mean, a recount can give you reasons for a contest, and if you say you can't have a contest until you can only, your deadline for doing a contest is the day that Assembly has its notice to certify, and your recount hasn't happened yet, that's not really fair. And again, we're not trying to, I know the Chris versus Sammy show was no fun to watch on either side. It's painful. I guess all I'm saying is we're not trying to take sides in that show. We're just saying, make it a step-by-step process, kind of a hierarchy. It's better to start with a recount and then move to a contest if you learn something, and recertify or whatever. That would be my recommendation.
Sure. So what I would say about the contest is when we did receive the contest in 22, the code didn't provide us any process. And so we will look again at having the contest have additional time after a recount and try to add some process to it so that it's clear what our responsibilities are under the code for the future.
And I would say for me, I'm not sure I would say is not supportive of. I would say for me is I'm not excited about it.
Okay.
It's, to make a change like this, I would kind of want to see what's the message we're sending, and do we need to, especially do we need to right now?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I am on it, and then plus some of these other balances that all of us have talked about.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I would just like to add my little 2 cents. I don't have the history of being in the election process as lieutenant governor, but the fact that there has not been a problem in the past, I can see if there was a huge problem with all these frivolous complaints that, okay, look, we need to put some boundaries on it. But I don't see where that's generating, and just to say, well, they're charging 1,000, so we should charge 1,000. I don't think that's really valid, a good enough reason to, in my mind, to make it more difficult to question, and with the ultimate result of reducing the integrity and confidence in our election process. So, my 2 cents.
Thanks.
Can I say one other thing? We've gone back and forth on the issue of what we can do to reduce the number of rejected votes. And I'd appreciate it if you could inform the committee that we've been working on that it's your professional opinion that you don't need changes in statute. What I'm most concerned about, very honestly, Bill, in your thing, and I was lieutenant governor 10 years ago, and it seems every time I turn around and ask, how can we fix this thing with email to be able to be better touch with people, to cure and so forth, it's always one more revision of the software that's going to just be done year after next. Well, it's now 10 years, and we did put the email thing in the state thing, but if they don't share it with you, that's a problem. And then you've said, well, we're going to wait, and we've got to do this and so forth. Ask for more resources. That's what I'm saying. I mean, the number is a frightful number that we ought to fix, and especially where we've got this disconnect between the state and the federal government the state and the local government on this. The local government went its separate way, asked for resources to help verify signatures, in a situation. The number that we're throwing out, in the cure process where we don't even have emails and that sort of thing is what I consider to be an emergency. And The only part of your email back to me was just, well, it's going to take another 2 years or something. I ask for the resources would be my recommendation. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's 11:37.
Okay, if there's no further comments, I'm going to adjourn this meeting at 11:37 a.m. on September 25th, 2024.